Having a quorum, I would like to open the August 19th meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Here.
Commissioner Justice. Absent. Chair Bartlett.
Here. Our first item on the agenda will be our preliminary matters. First action will be to review the minutes and resolutions. We have one set of minutes, which would be the draft minutes of August 12th, 2010, and then the draft resolution number 009-10 for 34 West Victoria Street. So any comments to the minutes of August 12th?
Chair Bartlett.
Yes.
Respectfully, I do have some comments that have come forward from the staff planner, and she is present today, Allison DeBusk, to share the comments with
great.
you.
Ms. DeBusk.
Thank you. This is actually on the resolution. I just had two minor changes that I can wait until you get to that.
Okay, it'll be just a second. Are there any comments as to the minutes? If there's none from anybody else,
Actually, Mr. Chair, I do have.
Okay.
I had one concern, but
You're
I
looking
looked
at,
at
you're
it.
looking at the resolution.
I looked at it online. It was under the. I don't have the page number, but it was under my comment about historical. Oh, thank you. Under the historical, when I asked about the landmarking, I actually took my comment right out of the report, the historic structures report, or the archaeological report that HLC reviews, and it did say that it was a Class 2 and that mural could be landmarked. So, you know, that was my recommendation, and it says, it uses a word like possible or perhaps, and I thought we should take that word out.
Are you clear on?
I don't know if I got it under the resolution or the motion itself.
Probably the motion.
Chair Bartlett, I believe Commissioner Larson's talking about the motion, which is on page 4. One of the conditions was the applicant to apply for landmark or structure of merit status for the mural that will be relocated to Chapala Street frontage based on the HLC's direction. So I thought it was fairly generic, and so they'll apply for whichever one that they.
Okay,
that
that's
get.
fine. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any language in it that was waffly. Thank you.
Okay, and I do have a few comments to the minutes on page 2, near the top of the page. You're listing Commissioner Jacobs as being absent, and then in the next sentence that she abstained. So I think she was absent rather than abstaining.
Okay.
And on page 4 at the bottom, the motion and the vote count is repeated twice.
That was addressed. That was no longer there.
Oh, okay. And at the very end on adjournment, it should be Chair Justice. I had recused myself and left the meeting early, not Chair Bartlett. And those are the comments to the minutes. Now on to the resolution. Are there comments from the Commission on the resolution? Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I realize how difficult it is to take something that was talked about and actually put it down and make sense, but on page 5, at the top of the page regarding the bicycle parking, I just wanted to pose to the rest of the commissioners whether my interpretation of what we talked about last week, particularly myself and Commissioner Justice, is accurately represented there. Commissioner Justice's initial motion had to do with visitors to the property and ensuring that there was adequate ground-mounted bicycle racks to encourage and handle visitors to the retail parts of the property for bicycle parking. My comment that was then added on there had to do with the storage units that are at the bottom far end of the parking structure, and ensuring that some of that same type of parking was moved up to the first floor inside the secure or locked doors of the residential compound to encourage bicycle users from the residential users. And I'm uncertain whether that gets there or it's clear enough or if it could be clearer. And I've sat here and looked at this and struggled, and I don't know that I can make it any clearer than Ms. DeBusk, but if anybody else had any suggestions as to that or was willing to help with that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, before we dive into it, I wanted to ask Mr. Busk if any of the revisions that you were going to mention have to do with that. No? Okay. Any others, especially related to the bicycles? Ms. Schwartz?
Well, it seems to me that the first sentence in Section 5 on bicycle parking, Mr. Jordan would speak to and would be clear enough to support the amendment that you had requested of Mr. Jostis. Do you read that differently than your intention?
Well, the entire lot has a first floor, but the residential part of the lot doesn't cover the entire first floor. So there's some question in my mind whether I read that, whether HLC will take that to read that we can put some bicycle lock, or the choice would be HLC could say bicycle lockers that are secure, that offer a roof, can go outside of the secure residential area, and they may not like that, without pushing them towards trying to find a resolution that's inside the four locked gates and part of the residential compound, which I think was my original intent, that for it to be accessible and a product that will be used by the residents, it needs to be inside the four residential gates on the first floor and has easy access going out to off the property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm wondering then, in looking back at the motion, the language in the motion pertaining to this back on page 4, if we need to better align the description of the split between the secure bicycle parking in the underground parking facility and then within the four locked areas of the residential area.
I guess when I sit home and worry about this, I guess my worry is the control is really with what HLC decides to do from a design standpoint. But I'd like them to make that choice based on what the real goal was and not a choice that's a lesser goal, or nothing at all, which is okay too.
Well, I think it's important to go back to the original requirements and the tabulations for the project. The requirement on this was 6 bicycles for the commercial parking and 6 bicycles for the residential. The fact that the applicant chose to provide 61 bicycles, I think if we want bicycles up at the first floor at street level, then it seems to me hard to force them to do more than the required parking there and let them have the balance in the garage. They're providing so much more than what's required. I mean, it's really unclear in this motion. In fact, that last sentence of the condition where it says at least 50% of the provided on-site commercial bike parking spaces shall be ground-mounted racks and, if possible, located in a common area outside the parking space of the garage. Well, if they're required to have 6 spaces, why don't we just say provide those 6 spaces at the, it's really convoluted the way it's worded to figure out, well, how many does that mean? Let them have 6 up at the street, which are all the required bike parking, and put the balance in the garage.
But I think the last sentence has to do with the visitors to the site, not the residents. The commercial.
Oh, that's commercial, right. And then on the prior sentence, if you want the others up at the first floor, it should be at the first floor of the residential development. Just add the word in.
Okay.
So then it's clear where we're talking about.
Okay. I'd go with that suggestion.
But I have trouble trying to force them to put more than the required parking up at the street. I mean, they wanted all of it in the basement. I could see doing the required parking at the upper level. So with that, do you want to change the wording on this?
I would, so adding the word residential in front of development, I think, would clear it up a little bit.
So that would be at the end, or near the end of the second sentence,
Yep.
where it says, or
Floor of the
similar
residential
covered
development.
lockable storage on the first floor of the residential development.
Yep.
Okay.
As long as Ms. DeBusk, does that kind of carry the intent, Ms. DeBusk, that it's interior to the residential units?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Jordan, it does. And to speak to that last sentence, I just want to be clear that the 50% was just to say that the rack type should be ground mounted, not necessarily on the ground floor or first floor of the development. It leaves that, it just says if possible, and leaves that to the HLC.
Right. It comes out to the same number either way. It's just that you need to refer back to the project plans to figure out what that number is. I mean, if we're talking about 6 spaces, why not just say 6 spaces? But I'm fine with it this way. It's the same answer. Okay. Any other comments on the resolution? Okay. And
Chair Bartlett?
yes.
I did have 2 corrections. The first is on page 2. The last sentence, it reads that final review is provided by the ABR, and it should actually read Historic Landmarks Commission.
Okay. And you said you had one more as well?
Yes, and on page 6, condition B4, the very last sentence should be deleted, where it says the following tree protection measures shall be incorporated, and there are none proposed, so that sentence should be deleted.
Which number was that again?
Condition B4, landscape plan compliance.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay, if there's no other comments, I would look for a motion to approve the minutes of August 12th and the resolution for 34 West Victoria Street.
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. I need to abstain from items 4 and 5 on the draft minutes of August 12th, and I believe Ms. Larson is
Thank you,
in the
Mr.
same.
Chair. I do as well.
Right. Okay,
Chair-
Mr.
Chair
Cotto,
Bartlett.
were there any announcements or appeals? Or did you have something else prior to that?
Just something on the subject of the minutes. When we went to the action minutes, we thought we'd be able to come back to you the very next meeting and have them ready to go. And it's turning out that that's really not enough time to review what happened, make sure we got the language right, make sure we proofread everything adequately, and we have these performance measures that we said we would. When we relooked at it, it didn't require us to have them to you for decision the next meeting. They just have to be ready. So from now on, we'll be taking a couple of weeks instead. You'll have a full week to look at it, and we'll have about a full week to look at it as well.
Right.
So hopefully we won't be having these typos and weird stuff.
Okay. Well, I think it probably will be more efficient because it does take up time up here.
Right.
But it's because we've all had so little time to look at it. So
Right.
appreciate the feedback. So going on, are there any announcements and appeals? Danny?
Yes, one appeal. It's not two announcements. There's been an appeal of the El Encanto HLC process. The El Encanto Hotel received final approval of the northwest corner. That was the subject of such contention here, both here and at the city council, and that has been appealed by Trevor Martinson, and we're working with him to either we have to set a date or see if we can mediate something, and then preliminary approval of the Mission Village was also given just last Wednesday, I think, and that was yesterday, and that will most likely be appealed as well. So, just wanted to let you know about that. The appeal of 401 Old Coast Highway, which was heard on council on Tuesday. The results of that was they upheld the appeal and overturned. They approved the project. For your recollection, The staff hearing officer denied the project, the planning commission denied it on appeal, the council overturned that and approved the project. A big condition was that all 3 units had to be rented in perpetuity to Section 8 tenants. That's the major thing that I recall about that. I wasn't here. I didn't attend that meeting, but that's the report.
Is there feedback for the commission, considering that they reversed our decision? Yes.
I was the council representative to that hearing, and the council was really concerned about losing that 3-bedroom residential lower-cost housing unit. And so I think it was a case of it's better than what's there now with the proposed additional landscaping and reorganizing of things. I think there were more was done by the architect in terms of providing light and ventilation than what we saw. And again, it was just the concern about losing another. They recognized that it could be done with a smaller unit, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to stick with the larger one because it is a large. It's a 3-bedroom rental unit under Section 8. I think 2 of the council members voted against it. Councilmember Francisco suggested a compromise of pulling the back wall back instead of 10 feet, 6 feet, but the majority of the council approved it as was presented to them.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to represent the Planning Commission at that appeal. I know we all have to take our hits once in a while, so thank you for that. I do recall, though, that when we reviewed that project, that we had that discussion with Mr. Vincent that we could not place a condition to require the Section 8, even though that's what happened at council level. So I'd be curious.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I still think that there's a problem with that condition. The applicant has made that commitment to the council, and that will be a recorded condition that's binding on that applicant and will run with that property. But I don't see how we bind the federal government into, one, keeping the Section 8 program going, and it was written in such a way that it acknowledged that as long as Section 8 is there. But more importantly, to what my answer to the Commission was, is that if that applicant or a subsequent property owner was to do something that violated Section 8 and HUD chose to kick them out of the program, there is another way that applicant wasn't going to be able to satisfy that condition anymore, and it was just going to create a new problem where it's just kicking the can down the road. The council chose to go with the condition from that applicant and hope for the best, and we'll see how it all turns out.
Thanks for refreshing my memory, because I did recall we had that discussion here and we couldn't really go there, so even though we tried. Ms. Lodge.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Council member Self commented that since the wall, that's the back wall of the unit, which is on the property line, is on a parking lot, that it really wasn't impinging on the neighboring property, and so she felt comfortable leaving it where it is.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Cato? Great. Thank you. Next, I'll open public comment, and this is for items not on today's agenda. If there's anything else that people would like to bring up, you can have 2 minutes. Seeing no one, I'll close public comment. We'll move forward with our first action item, which is a new item. This is the application of Sid Goldstein, agent for Albert F. Zeck Trust, and this is the 2501 through 2511 Medcliff Road, and I believe Kelly Brodesson will be doing the staff presentation.
Mr. Chair, I'll be recusing myself today. I live in close proximity, so carry on.
Great. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. The project being presented today, as you said, is a 4-lot subdivision on the Mesa in the appealable jurisdiction of the coastal zone. The project site is located at 2501 Medcliff Road and is situated on the ocean side of Medcliff.
Kelly, could you move the microphone just a little closer? Great, thank you.
Okay, so it's situated on the ocean side of Medcliff, as shown in this slide. And it's just off of Mesa Lane and a few lots to the east of the Douglas Family Preserve. The applicant is requesting to subdivide the 2 existing parcels to create 4 legal parcels ranging in size from 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. The minimum lot size in this E3 zone is 7,500 square feet. Parcels A, B, and C are all currently developed with residential uses. The fourth parcel, Parcel D, is not proposed for development at this time. In addition to the subdivision, the project also includes approximately 235 cubic yards of grading to realign and widen the existing driveway. Constructing new driveways for the front 2 parcels, parcels B and C, constructing a carport on parcel B, creating a development envelope for the future development of parcel D, proposed infiltration basins on each lot, undergrounding the existing utilities, and the installation of a residential type fire hydrant. Also, the project is subject to the recommendations of the city's pedestrian master plan, calling for sidewalk and parkway frontage improvements along Medcliff Road. The discretionary applications requested are 2 modifications to create lots which have no frontage on a public street, a public street frontage waiver to create lots without public street frontage, a tentative subdivision map to allow the division of 2 parcels into 4, a coastal development permit to allow the proposed subdivision in the appealable jurisdiction of the city's coastal zone, and a performance standard permit to allow an additional dwelling unit on parcel A. The project was reviewed at the Single Family Design Board on 2 occasions. On April 26th, the board supported the overall project. They did request that the applicant reduce the development envelope of parcel D to provide greater setbacks to the shared driveway. One board member did prefer to see an alternative, a more organic material used for the proposed sidewalk on Medcliff rather than concrete, considering the project's proximity to the Douglas Family Preserve. On May 10th, the project returned to the Single Family Design Board, and at that meeting, the board supported the private driveway serving 4 lots, with lots B and C being served by individual driveways. The board was concerned with the future house sizes on these lots, considering that these lots are much larger than the neighboring lots. And the board asked that the Planning Commission further study the building envelopes of these lots for the purpose of finding the project compatible with the existing neighborhood. As I said, their concern is that the larger lot sizes could allow the future houses to be much larger than those in the neighborhood. Also, the applicant agreed to a condition that would restrict development within 20 feet of the private driveway easement as a way to regulate the future house sizes. The board again questioned whether introduction of sidewalks would be consistent with the rural character of the neighborhood and the street leading to the Douglas Family Preserve. The project was forwarded to the Planning Commission with these concerns. We do have a representative from the Single Family Design Board when you have questions. Let's see. As part of some of the issues that we looked at during the review process were the street frontage modifications, the public street frontage waiver, and the performance standard permit. In the E3 zone, lots require 60 feet of street frontage, and the existing parcels 1 and 2 have a combined total of 320 square feet along Medcliff. The applicant has requested modifications for parcels, let's see, A and D to provide less than that frontage. With this subdivision, proposed parcels B and C will each have the required 60 feet. However, A and D are configured such that they would be accessed from the driveway leading off of Medcliff Road. The other modification, or it's a waiver, is that the municipal code requires that each lot created by a subdivision front upon a public street serving no more than 2 lots unless the Planning Commission waives this requirement. Currently, 4 parcels take access off of this driveway, and although the lots will be reconfigured, 4 parcels would continue to take access off the driveway. Here's a view of the existing driveway from Medcliff Road. Also, on parcel D, as the slide says, the construction on these parcels was done sometime in the early 60s, which is before the conditional use permit ordinance was written. In order to approve a performance standard permit, the lot would have to be twice the size of a regular lot, and we'd have to find that there was adequate provisions for the ingress and egress, and that the location of the additional dwelling unit complies with applicable ordinances. The additional dwelling unit is on proposed parcel A, and as I said, it is legally non-conforming. See, based on staff's analysis, the proposed project conforms to the city's zoning and building ordinances and the policies of the general plan and the local coastal plan. I have provided revised findings clarifying the public street frontage waiver, and I've made some edits to the conditions of approval, and these documents have been provided to you. And in closing, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project, make the revised findings, and also subject to the revised conditions of approval in Exhibit A. We have received 3 letters from interested parties which have been provided to you, and we also have a representative here today from Public Works Engineering and Public Works Transportation Planning if you have any questions. And that concludes my presentation today.
Great. Well, thank you for a concise staff report. Appreciate that. With that, we'd like to go to the applicant presentation.
Before I get started, can I just make a point of clarity?
Yes, if you could give your name, though, for the record.
Sure. My name is Robert Ruiz, and I'm with Sid Goldstein Civil Engineer. We represent the applicant. Looking at the exhibit there's 2 parcel Ds. Actually, the one up at Medcliff to the yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
We're good.
Okay.
We're good. As I said, my name is Robert Ruiz, and I'm with Sid Goldstein Civil Engineer. We're pleased to be here on behalf of Mr. Zek and this project. First of all, I'd like to thank Kelly for her presentation and all of her work that she's done up until now. It's been a pleasure working with her, and I know that she's put in a lot of hard work on this, and we certainly appreciate it. I would also like to thank the commission members for taking the time to come to the site on Tuesday to familiarize yourselves with the site. The applicant's owner, Mr. Zek, has owned the property since the 1950s, and his hope with this project is to fulfill his long-term estate planning goals while maintaining the existing homes on site and respecting the historic use of the land. Presently, there are 4 homes on 2 separate legal lots. This project proposes to divide the 2 existing lots so that when done, the existing 4 homes will be located on 3 on the 4 newly created parcels. Access to the 4 existing homes on the Zek property, in addition to 2 homes directly west of the Zek property, is by use of an existing shared driveway. In its current condition, the shared driveway is substandard and does not meet current access and fire department requirements. In addition, no fire hydrant currently exists on the site to assist in fighting fires. Utility service to the existing homes is by utilities that are located in various locations throughout the Zek property. Easements are granted across portions of the Zek property for utilities, but in some cases, those utilities are not located within their respective easement. The layout before you today to divide 2 existing lots into 4 and to realign and improve the existing driveway to make it meet current access and fire department standards is a result of diligently working with the city's Creeks Division and the city's planning, engineering, fire, and transportation departments. The project also reflects recommendations from the Single Family Design Review Board, which include providing turnaround areas on parcels B and C to ensure that vehicles coming from those parcels drive straight out onto Medcliff. They don't back out onto Medcliff. Moving the infiltration beds, which will mitigate any increased runoff from this project from beneath oak trees or any trees within the parcels. Having the design for the carport proposed for parcel 2 incorporate the use of heavy timbers, and providing a greater building setback along the realigned driveway to ensure greater separation between the homes on the parcels and for better aesthetics. Zoning requires 6-foot setbacks in private driveways, and we've agreed agreed with the single-family design board that 20 would work in this situation. If approved, this project will improve the shared driveway to current access and fire department standards, including constructing a new fire hydrant on site where none exists today. This project proposes to have Parcel B and Parcel C take direct access off of Medcliff Road, effectively reducing the use of the shared driveway from 6 homes to 4 homes initially, and ultimately to 5 homes sometime in the future when Parcel D is built out. In addition, this project will reroute utilities under the realigned driveway in an orderly manner, including placing the existing overhead utility lines underground. Once the utilities are rerouted and the driveway is realigned, a new easement will be granted that will encompass the realigned driveway and the utilities beneath it. Other benefits from this project include the construction of frontage improvements on Medcliff Road, consisting of 6-foot wide sidewalks and a 4-foot wide landscape parkway, upgrading the infrastructure, including installation of the fire hydrant on site to meet current location and flow requirements. And the fire hydrant will not only benefit this property, but it will benefit neighboring properties. The project will also allow for cleaning up of random utilities and easements scattered throughout the site, including realigning an easement owned by the city for a sewer main that doesn't coincide with the easement. The sewer main and the easement don't coincide with one another. It provides an opportunity for undergrounding utilities on neighboring properties, as evidenced by neighbors' comments with memos I think that have been forwarded to you. And in closing, I would like to reiterate Mrs. Brodeson's comments that all criteria is met for the approval of the tentative map, the coastal development permit, the performance standard permit, the lot frontage modification, and the public street frontage waiver. The project does conform to zoning and general plan designations. The project does not propose to maximize density as allowed by zoning. That the project is compatible with surrounding lots, specifically lots to the east and west that are similar in size and that also make use of shared driveways. And you can see that in an aerial exhibit that should have been included in your packets. And finally, that the project has the support of the staff and the neighbors. So with that, I'd like to close by asking for your favorable review, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much. You have quite a bit of time left. I appreciate the fact that you didn't use it, so I'll give you more later if there's anything to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to open public comment, and I know Paul Zink has been patiently waiting to represent the Single Family Design Board, so come on up, Paul.
Hello. My name is Paul Zink, and I just want to go over what the review that happened at Single Family Design Board. 2 issues that I want to bring to your attention. The first one is the sidewalk and how it's going to be addressed. There was a concern made by one member of the board, but I believe that neighborhood as a whole has a concern about the sidewalks in that area and how they're designed and how they're integrated. I know along Edgewater there was a couple of projects that chose not to have sidewalks because they like that rural character, and then there was a couple that did have to have sidewalks put in. And so there's a real inconsistency, or there's something that needs to be addressed. Either we are going to want to have sidewalks or we're going to choose not to have sidewalks. We want to have a different solution here. And so that was mentioned as a concern, and I did not read the findings or what the recommendations were from Public Works and what they're going to put there. But it is something that needs to be studied, because that is a highly trafficked pedestrian walkway, and what the future goals are for that neighborhood area. The second issue has to do about the lot size and the size of the houses that are going to be placed on there. A majority of the board voted to say that there is some concern about the size of the lots, which can lead to a larger size home on the property, which is inconsistent with the neighborhood. I personally did not agree with that statement, so I dissented from the vote versus being a negative no vote, because I see that the subdivision is a fine subdivision. I don't have a problem with it, so I didn't want to be negative. what I want to explain is why the board has a concern. And the concern is when projects are over 85% of the FAR, this little formula or table that's in this, on the design guideline, you have to do the 20 closest homes survey. The 20 closest homes survey is based upon the actual floor area ratio as a number, and it's also reviewed as the actual square footage of the home. So we have large lots adjacent to a neighborhood that has, say, 7,000 to 9,000 square foot lots. Now, your FAR, if you had a very, very large lot with a large house on it, because you had a large lot, the FAR number is going to be really small. And likewise, if you had a really small lot, but you happen to have, say, a modest home of whether it's 12, 15, 1,800 square feet, because the lot was so small, it becomes a large FAR. So it kind of skews the numbers. So now you have these 4 or 5 lots that are going to be placed here. They'll mess up the table a little bit because you're not comparing all the same kind of apples when you do an apples-to-apples evaluation. So when you want to look at the table and say, well, are you the largest FAR? No, I'm not. Are you the largest square footage? Well, I might be. So there's a concern that when we review these projects that there's it's a different kind of animal because this home is a larger home, larger lot, and it could lead to the other smaller lots in the neighborhood actually using their larger home size as a benefit to pop themselves up a little bit bigger. Am I making any sense? Good explanation. So that's the concern that the majority of the board had, and they actually placed it upon you to sort of evaluate it. I like the wording that's in our motion. The Planning Commission is requested to study the building envelopes for the lots for the purpose of finding the compatibility with the existing neighborhood, and the subdivision should enhance the neighborhood rather than be detrimental to it. So that was just a concern that was raised by a majority of the board members, and I'm bringing it to you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Zink while we have him at the podium? Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zink, from what I understand from what you just said, your concern is not so much the size of houses that might ultimately be built on these lots, which could be a lot larger than most of them already have houses on them. There's just one that might have a new one. But what would happen in terms of that larger home then being added into the pile of things you go by for what's allowed, allowing oversized houses on the neighboring small lots. Do I
That's
understand?
exactly the concern that people are reading into it.
Okay.
Because across the street, you can tell that there's a smaller neighborhood and say, well, here's a 4,000 square foot house and mine's only 1,800 square feet or mine's 22 or 27. Look, I'm a lot smaller than the neighborhood. But the 20 closest homes survey is a circle. And if you take the houses that are closer to, I feel that they'll only grab 2 of the lots that are in subject. So it'll only mess up, 20% of the numbers or something like that.
Okay, but you don't have an objection to larger houses on the larger lots per se?
I don't believe some of the board members might have had that, but I think the more underlying concern is the ripple effect on the smaller lots.
Okay.
Because these houses, on the lots that they are and their setbacks, won't affect the neighborhood,
Okay.
I believe.
Thank you.
Ms. Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The plan that's presented to us has setback envelopes, but not really a building envelope. Was there discussion of specifying building envelopes on each parcel?
That's out of our purview. I mean, we did kick it around a little bit, and we realized that that's not what our board is supposed to do. A couple of people suggested on Lot D, which is adjacent to some other houses, can you give us a better setback instead of having either 6 or 10, and the applicant willingly went to 20. And so that was their own choice. We personally asked for the 20 feet along the drive because if you could go with 10 or 6, then you go, but wait a second, you know what, this is really a public, or, not quite a public, a pseudo-public road that leads to these other homes. We want to push the homes away from it. So we did not discuss development envelopes because it's outside of our purview. It's not what we do.
And then the FARs and the table, your description of the ripple effect to the neighborhood is excellent. Mr. Bartlett and I were both on that NPO committee that set that table up, and it is hard to explain, but the Single Family Design Review Board is implementing it beautifully. The question I have, and I don't have my table with me, but these lots would be so large they would not be subject to FAR regulations.
Guideline only.
Be guideline only. And whereas the smaller houses around would more likely be under the regulations to limit their FARs. And if I did have my table, I'd be trying to find out what the recommended FARs are for parcels of this size, like for a 22,000 square foot parcel. And then when we have that information, that would be helpful just to talk about that FAR and that possible ripple effect through the neighborhood. That's all.
Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zink, you mentioned, and rightly so, an inconsistency in that neighborhood of walk areas, whether they're sidewalks or otherwise. Do you have an opinion about sidewalks, design, integration, and so forth for our consideration today?
Personally, on my own, the people there like it the way it is. They like the semi-rural characteristic, and they try to avoid the curb and gutter. And another example is Carpinteria. There's areas in Carpinteria that they adamantly oppose curb and gutter and sidewalk because they like that look. It's just part of the charm. So integrating a hard edge takes away from that kind of look. So I would rather keep this a little cute little unique area, and that's just kind of unique the way it is. If we want to have a designated pathway, perhaps it should be DG, or decomposed granite, some kind of walkway. Public Works doesn't like that because the gravel gets in the road and causes further problems. So there's no real solution. Making the cars drive really slow so that the actual pedestrians are walking in the asphalt. Maybe that's the solution, and have people more landscape the sides. So keeping it the way it is and keeping it semi-rural is my personal opinion.
Great. Thank you for coming in and sharing that input. Our next public speaker will be, I believe it's Rodney Delwin.
Good afternoon. It's actually Rodney Delson, D-E-L-S-O-N.
Okay.
My wife and I own the property located at 2417 Medcliff Road, so it's adjacent and it shares the public road, or the semi-public road. Our property currently is benefited by the roadway and utility easement that runs from our driveway out to Medcliff that the applicant will need to relocate as part of the proposed subdivision. That roadway is the only access we have to our property. I'm here to state that based upon an agreement in principle to protect our rights we have reached with the applicant that has not yet been documented and signed, I support the proposed project.
Great. Appreciate your coming in. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for questions and or comments. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to the applicant. Mr. Goldstein, you and I spoke briefly at the site visit about the surfacing, I think, of the new driveway and so forth. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you've investigated and what you might be proposing there?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Schwartz, members of the Commission. Just for the record, my name is Sid Goldstein. What Ms. Schwartz and I discussed is the possibility of including permeable paving, is what we had talked about, as an option to standard paving, asphalt or concrete. And we actually discussed that with city staff. City staff would accept permeable paving. But in lieu of that, because the driveway itself sheets to the adjoining properties, the drainage, what we did was created individual basins on each parcel that would be created as part of the construction of the roadway and dealt with the runoff in that nature rather than relying on permeable paving. I've read different reviews on the long-term benefits of permeable paving, And it's kind of a mixed bag. Permeable paving does require routine, regular maintenance by way of actually vacuuming the paving surface. The voids can become clogged and void the benefits of permeable paving. It also relies on permeable soil below that paving structure. And if you don't have the proper soils, then the gravel bed that would be placed under the permeable paving simply fills up, doesn't percolate into the ground, and again loses the benefit of that paving. So for all those reasons, we decided to go to the basins as a better, more viable option. So in answer to your question, the paving surface will most likely be standard asphalt paving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What comes to mind to me is that we used at Schofield Park a stabilized DG. I don't know exactly what that means, but in terms of getting DG into the street, that may be a solution. My question is there a Cobra Head? I couldn't remember from the site visit, nor did I look. Is there a Cobra Head street light near there, or is there street lighting on the frontage of this proposal?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioners, there are 2 street lights. They're actually across the street, but they are within the span of the project, and the project is conditioned to replace both of those.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
Johnson.
Yeah, thanks.
Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about what is proposed for the sidewalks. Is the proposal to put in standard curbs, gutters, and sidewalks where it doesn't exist? Although, of course, all along the street on the other side of Medcliff seems to be all sidewalk, and there are just a few places, including in front of this property, where it is not on the other side of the street, but the other side of the street seems to be at least half, if not more, existing sidewalks. So could you please tell me what we've proposed for here?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge. The proposal, the way it stands now, is to provide sidewalk at the frontage of this project, and that includes a 6-foot wide sidewalk with 4-foot wide landscape area. That's the very discussion that came up at the Single Family Design Board. And as the applicants, we don't particularly have a preference if we do decomposed granite or sidewalk. We'd leave it to the pleasure of the Commission to give us some direction on that. But the way it stands now, we're showing sidewalk.
Thank you. I just should I save my comments for later, or
Let's finish questions, and I think we'll get to comments real quick.
Chair Bartlett, Commissioner Lodge, if I could speak a little bit more to the sidewalk. Steve Foley, Supervising Transportation Planner. The entire north section of Medcliff has sidewalk. The southern section currently has sidewalk to the east and to the west, and this would be a missing link. And it actually is identified in the pedestrian master plan as a missing link. And so I don't know if it was specifically a comment early on that planning or that transportation planning had requested that this be included, but it would be consistent with the pedestrian master plan to be included, and that would actually be our requirement.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Bartlett. I was wondering if we had a FAR reference. Did you find that table? For
Chair
example, square footage of 22,000 square foot lot and then of a 50,000 square foot lot.
Chair Bartlett, Commissioner Jacobs, yeah, I did find that. I did find the table in the guidelines. It's a little bit difficult to find in here. For those watching, it's on page 20-C. For a 20,000 square foot lot, the maximum home size, which is 100% of the FAR, including the garage, would be 4,690 square feet. And 85% would be 3,987 square feet. So a bit under 4,000 square feet to meet the 85%. A 15,000 square foot lot, 85% is 3,719. so about 300 square feet less in total. And then if we went all the way down to the lots across the street, for example, about let's call it a 7,500 square foot lot, which is the minimum for the E3 zone. That's about 2,614 square feet.
Okay, thanks. That's all my questions.
Okay, I have a question for Mr. Foley. When we went to the site visit, this particular side of Medcliff, even if we do put in the sidewalks, doesn't connect at either end. There's still gaps and missing links. Is there any way to get those completed so that we actually finish this exercise, or are we just going to have an isolated chunk of sidewalk that doesn't connect on either end?
Chair Bartlett, you would have, with the completion of this project, to the immediate west, you'd have one parcel that is missing its link at La Jolla Drive, so you'd have a small section that's missing there. You would also have probably somewhere around 20 or 30 feet missing on the eastern side. They would still be part of the missing link infill program, and as funds became available from the city, they would be included, but it would not be required as part of this project.
How did the condition at the east occur, where it has sidewalks in front of that parcel probably for about 75% of its lot frontage, and then it's abandoned for that one chunk? I mean, was that done without permit, or?
We're talking to the east?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that is. It's about a half of the parcel, and I'm not sure why that stops there.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I had a question that I raised to Kelly yesterday, and I thought maybe I can at least mention it now so that at least the explanation can be heard by the rest of the board, just to kind of impart the knowledge. I was questioning on Lot A, which is the one lot that is proposed to have the performance standard permit to allow the two existing houses and garages to remain. And I was questioning, because in the ordinance, the maximum allowable garage size for a large parcel over 20,000 square feet is 750 square feet, and yet the parking requirement, covered parking for the homes, is two-car garages at 400 each. So I was wondering, were we required to have a modification for having oversized garages? But I guess the performance standard permit, because it's the required parking for each house, that trumps the 750 square foot limit that's elsewhere in the ordinance. So I appreciated staff clarifying that for me, and I thought maybe at least others would want to hear it, because I'm sure we'll be reviewing other performance standard permits in the future. So anyway, thanks for doing the research on that. Okay, comments, please.
Mr. Chair, I just have one more question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Were view easements considered when this was all being looked at as a possibility?
I'm sorry, can you restate this question?
Was any consideration given to view easements when the subdivision was formed?
We looked at that. Are you to preserve the views? Are you
Yes,
thinking?
from one parcel to another, and we've seen some fabulous fights here over views, hedges, trees that get really awful.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering. I thought, oh, what a ground floor opportunity to really take care of that.
Right.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Larson, we looked at that, and since the parcels themselves are across the street from Medcliff, I'm presuming we're talking about the homes to the north?
I was talking about the homes in the subdivision.
Yeah. I think the 20-foot setback along the driveway, and then in parcel D, which is the only home that doesn't have a residence on it, there's also a 20-foot setback on the eastern property line. So a building envelope has been identified for parcel D, which is the only undeveloped parcel.
Your light is still on as well.
Sorry.
Actually, I did have one more question for staff. It's stump the staff day. So anyway, I'm trying to understand under the required applications, can you explain the difference between number 1 and number 2? One's the modification to allow newly created lots to have no frontage on a public street instead of the 60 feet, and then the public street frontage waiver to have a lot without street frontage. They almost sound the same to me, and I'm trying to understand why it's two separate items. I'm sure there's a good reason, so.
Chair Bartlett, I believe the difference is the modifications are actually a zoning ordinance requirement. Each new lot in the E3 zone requires 60 feet of frontage, so that's an actual modification.
Can you use your microphone again?
Oh, sorry. Did you hear me? Do I need to say that again?
We can hear you now, right.
The modifications are a zoning ordinance requirement, so each new lot created in the E3 zone requires 60 feet of frontage for the zoning ordinance. And then the public street frontage waiver is a waiver that can be granted to the Planning Commission, by the Planning Commission under the Subdivision Map Act. Is that correct? And that's my theory.
So the modifications are per lot, and then the public street frontage waiver is for the subdivision then?
That's
Mr.
what
Chair,
I think.
and members of the commission, the standards are coming from two different places. The zoning standard has setbacks, street frontage, lot area requirements. The subdivision standards, how a subdivision is to be laid out and how it's to provide its access, has its own set of standards. And so they work in tandem in this particular case. Okay. And you frequently see the two actions being requested at the same time. But the reason why they're two separate actions is simply because we're addressing variances from two different standards.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. Okay, comments from the commission, and I'd like to have us, all weigh in on the sidewalk issue as well as the proposed subdivision. So, Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I particularly looked at the sidewalk situation there, and I think it would be preferable to have sidewalks rather than the existing situation where people are forced into the street. Particularly, there's some places where you can walk on the dirt, but there are others where there's vegetation growing in that area where there would be a sidewalk and a planting strip. So I think I understand the desire to have the more or less urban feeling, I should say. But since most of it actually does have sidewalks, I'm not sure that this will make that much, it will make it feel more urban than it already does. So, but if it can be in something like a stabilized decomposed granite or a material that is less formal looking than the concrete, that would certainly be acceptable to me. I'm also pleased to hear the applicant refer to working with the neighbors who are interested in undergrounding their utilities, and I think that would be a big improvement for the whole neighborhood, as will the subdivision by removing the utility lines that are on the property itself. Be a big improvement. So it seems to me that this is it's a reasonable subdivision of the property and will provide better access for the two lots that will get access directly from Medcliff instead of from the private drive. And I think this is a good proposal.
Great, thank you. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you. I concur with Ms. Lodge's statements. I would agree that the sidewalk should go in, and it should be in keeping with the city sidewalk standards and not trying to create some new standard on the fly. And we have seen over the years the hopscotch effect where the sidewalk gets put in and then there's a place that hasn't got it yet and then another one. But as properties develop and we continue to hold them to this standard, we eventually get a good pedestrian circulation system. So I definitely support the sidewalk. I would ask if there's any consideration regarding FAR restrictions, if the applicant would consider having future development future development stay within the guidelines for floor area ratio. I understand they are voluntary at this lot size, but some kind of accommodation for the FAR table would be a good idea for neighborhood compatibility. And then I have a question about, again, the modifications 1 and 2. The number 2, the subdivision modification, a public street frontage waiver to allow a subdivision creating lots without street frontage to be served in this case by a private shared driveway serving more than 2 lots. But on this private driveway, it's serving exactly 2 lots. So is there a reason why it's worded that way?
Yes, Chair Bartlett and Commissioner Jacobs. There are actually 2 parcels.
Oh, the pre-existing ones that are...
Yes,
okay.
that are not part of this proposal,
All
but
right,
do take it.
I understand. Okay. Glad I asked. And I also wanted to sound a agreement with Ms. Larson's direction regarding view easements. The view easement would be granted, for example, by parcel D to parcel C to avoid a parcel on D from obliterating views on parcel C, and the same a view easement granted by parcel A to parcel B. I would anticipate that these lots will be developed in the future very possibly by people who buy them and don't necessarily know each other and start to build over time. And this is a opportunity to create some goodwill in those future developments to designate some aspect that becomes a view easement. And it may not be possible, it may be too early in the development process, but I understand where Ms. Larson was going with that, and I would support some language to that effect if it were possible to do at this time.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this subdivision is owned by one person. The subdivider will be in control of any sale of the future lots. The buyers of those lots can choose whether to buy or not buy the lot with whatever restrictions or not restrictions come with the sale. I would recommend that we leave that bargained for transaction between the property owner and the future buyers. If the property owner and the future buyers can come to an agreement on a view easement, great. That will solve the problem. If they can't come to an agreement, whether because of the terms or the value or whatever, then so be it. They've had their opportunity to come to their own mind on what it's worth and what they want to do with their property and their value. This is the quintessential private issue. It's between that future buyer of one of these lots, and it's between this property owner and that future buyer. They will come to their meeting of the minds, or they won't. But this commission is only guessing as to how that would meet, how that would work. And I would suggest that any action this commission does now with the limited information we have at this time would only interfere with that private transaction down the road if it ever occurs.
That makes sense to me. But for your consideration in your estate planning. Thanks.
Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, on the sidewalk issue, as I walked that property and looked at the amount of paving on the property, I thought, gee, this would be like walking in a lovely kind of a park environment if it weren't for all this asphalt. And so I thought my picture in my mind was of a development that used a material like stabilized DG that wouldn't go all over the place into the road internally, as well as come out on, what you have to have a driveway apron apparently, but if it came out and crossed a surface that was also welcoming to pedestrians and was similar. it's sort of like when you carpet your house. If you carpet all the rooms a different color or use a different floor surface everywhere, pretty soon it looks pretty choppy and very ununiform. So, but if you do everything in a compatible fashion and with a consistency towards design and materials, then we have a very pleasant a pleasant experience, not only for walking but for driving and living in as well. So in that environment, I'm in favor of the more rural solution. I know that that my companions will go for more hardscape because of the meeting of the missing pieces of the sidewalk. But I think that my experience is that when we go up, say, Calle Montilla on the mesa to the man gate at Ealing's Park, those poor people that have to maintain that strip of right away by the curb of landscape, it just gets trampled by everyone, and it's just increasing burden on homeowners to maintain anything other than picking up trash and mashing plants by people coming, parking, and getting out of their cars and walking their dogs. So I think that I'm for the more rural, softer approach. I think that it'll be easier on the homeowners for maintenance over time and more pleasant walking experience. We have the sidewalk on the other side. Strollers, wheelchairs, things like that can easily roll on that surface. But on the surface on the south side, I would like to see a more natural approach. And that could be determined by the Single Family Design Board and the applicant. But that's such a strong semi-rural there. And if people don't want it, I'm not one to say, okay, this is your neighborhood, but I want you to have this piece of sidewalk. So that's my concern about the sidewalk. I just brought up the view easement because I thought if we could start saying it occasionally in this board, maybe people would be thinking about it. I mean, I realize it's something between homeowners, yes, indeedy, but if at least we get it out into our vocabulary a little bit, then maybe they'll say, oh, we're developing here, and any consideration about the views, because we don't have any provisions for protection of private views in the city, and they are pretty precious. But sometimes they're so precious that people get one, and then they enclose it with a 12-foot hedge, so that it becomes precious only to them, and we all lose. So those are my thoughts about it. All right, and I'm in favor of this. I think it's a lovely site. I think the current development is quite nice. A little sprucing up would be great, but in general, the friendly construction that's already there is of a pleasant scale, and I can certainly see how people would fall in love with that location. So I'm in support of the proposal. Thank you.
Chair Bartlett and Commissioners, I'm Victoria Johnson, project engineer. I'd just like to speak to your idea of a DG driveway. From the fire department perspective, they require the road to withstand 60,000 pounds, and that's why it needs to be paved. A DG would not hold up. I've only ever seen it in small places for sidewalk areas, but not for a driveway.
Let me ask one more question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, since you're here and you have knowledge. I know that when they installed the asphalt pavement at Goleta Valley the temporary parking lot, they call it the Holly Pat parking lot at Goleta Valley Hospital at Hollister and Patterson, they used a permeable asphalt. Is that possible?
I suppose anything is possible, anything can be engineered, but I think that the applicant's engineer already explained that you have to take into soils into account, and there's a lot of things that you have to look at to engineer something.
Okay.
And my main point in speaking up was just to speak to the fire department requirements of the 60,000 pound.
So there's no disguising the asphalt? There's no stabilization of, when they call it a stabilized
Not that I know
DG
of.
surface?
Mr. Goldstein can speak to that probably better than I can. If you,
I'd love to hear, because we did use it at Schofield Park, and I know there's fire up there. So I'm very curious.
First of all, I have a question for you. What do you have against asphalt paving? You know, aesthetically, and I was being facetious, but apparently it didn't go over too well.
Thanks.
In terms of compatibility, though, you know, you were talking about if there were a DG sidewalk, you would then want that to continue as a DG driveway, which would look great. But structurally, as Victoria pointed out, that wouldn't be acceptable to the fire department for access purposes. But we also have an asphalt paved roadway. So that also is compatible aesthetically with an asphalt paved driveway. What I have seen done, and again, it's not an ideal fix, is asphalt paving with a chip seal overlay. That makes it look more rural, but then you have maintenance aspects with that gravel also coming loose, eventually being dragged out into the roadway or off to the sides. So our preference would be to pave, well, let me back up a minute with regard to the sidewalk, because we also discussed this with Public Works. And the reaction from Public Works, and I'm sorry whether it was Public Works or Transportation, but the response, because we really don't care in terms of the walk, whether it's DG or concrete or any other type of walkable surface, but the response was that it needed to be consistent with their standards, and their standard is concrete sidewalk, if there's to be a public sidewalk. So, you know, unless they agree to something else and the condition remains that there be a sidewalk, it sounds like it's going to have to be concrete. So from that standpoint, our preference would be to simply pave the internal driveway as an asphalt paved driveway like all the other roads in the area are, and just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Bartlett, and I can speak a little bit more to that again about at least the sidewalk. Yes, the concrete is the standard materials, and it also runs along with meeting ADA requirements, and so maintaining that to meet ADA requirements is extremely difficult when we start using materials such as DG, and it actually puts the city in a liability position.
Are there any other materials? I mean, obviously downtown we use, you know, pavers and bricks and other things. What else meets the requirement other than concrete?
Chair Bartlett and Commissioners, we have a city standard for a reason, and it's so that we have standard sidewalk throughout the city. I know that there's certain places like downtown that people will put in some decorative paving or something, and then those people are also required to enter into an encroachment permit, and they're required to maintain. The city's not really interested in maintaining decorative paving, and I really don't see that happening in this neighborhood. We want consistency. That's the purpose of city standard. City standard concrete, it's all spec'd out in our standard details of the strength, the thickness, the widths, things
Great.
like that.
Well, thanks for clarifying that. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to start out by echoing Commissioner Larson's perspectives on the preference for a semi-rural or rural look and feel, because I think this property is very special. And in this neighborhood, in my opinion, there are not many parcels left that have this feeling and that are so close to the special Douglas Preserve. So I was hoping in our discussion, and I still am optimistic, that as you move forward, you can find a way to configure this and to design the landscaping in a way that maintains kind of a wilder look, a more rural look that references its closeness to the ocean, and and a special feeling in this part of the neighborhood of being so close to the ocean, because from our site visit, as we look back right across the street to the north side, it looks very suburban to me. And doesn't it all link that part just 1 block away from a coastal bluff to the special Pacific Ocean? So I would just ask you, whatever surfacing is feasible, is not cost prohibitive, and also meets transportation and fire requirements, that we try to keep in mind that we have an opportunity with this to, while meeting codes and creating consistency, nonetheless preserve, even restore if possible, that feeling in this neighborhood. This is probably one of the last opportunities, in my opinion, in this neighborhood to do that. And it sounds to me like your client really cares greatly, having owned this property and previously lived here for so long. So I would just ask that of you. I'm very pleased to hear that the undergrounding of the utilities is going to occur. I think that's going to help the visual aesthetics of not only this property, but I hear from the neighbors they're very much looking forward to that. And in general, I can support this and support staff's findings. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this was a interesting project to review, and I guess I sat down to do my homework, and I did it in the normal way and kind of started at the front and worked my way back, and I kept scratching my head as I looked at this going, gosh, the lots are still so big, and everybody's concerned about big houses adjacent to attract development across the street, and they're worried that because of the big lot, that somebody's going to put a big house on it in the future. And I kept thinking, well, the lots are big enough, you know, the parcel C could be 3 lots, and parcel B could be 2 lots, and, you know, or you could have multiple houses on each lot based on what the ordinances are. And then I got all the way through the packet, and at the very end, I finally got to the property owner's letter, and I was so touched by the fact that they have owned this for over 60 years, and they aren't trying to maximize development, and they're really trying to do something that makes a lot of sense, that I was quite humbled and kind of feel honored to be here today, and hopefully we can get this done in his lifetime. And I feel that it's a duty for us, I think, to respect the restraint that has been brought forward on this project. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And likewise, I wish there was a way we could keep as much of that rural feel as possible. I know we're already going to be losing the fence because of the pedestrian master plan, taking another foot of property. The fence also has to be lower. We're going to lose a lot of landscape, and then now the concrete sidewalk that won't connect to anything on either end. So I would ask that maybe there's a more rural solution. Can that sidewalk perhaps meander within that 11-foot zone that we have, so that it at least touches the street in a few locations, so that a pedestrian can actually get on it? At the two ends, you're going to have to walk across landscape to get to a sidewalk. So somehow a meandering walk or some other way, even if it has to be concrete, to me would at least carry forward some of that rural feel. I think the development itself is certainly an enhancement in terms of fire access and all the other attributes, and undergrounding of the utilities are real bonuses. And the fact that we're really not getting any more development other than one carport, I think is probably the first time we've ever seen a project that really isn't a project. So that's all good, and I want to make it happen, but I'm really concerned with that street frontage feel. Granted, we need to stick with the standard materials and not put the city in a liability position, but I think we also need to kind of honor this sort of last piece of rural property that isn't a housing tract yet, and hopefully my colleagues come up with a good idea as we craft a motion on that, but I just wanted to put that forward.
Chair Bartlett and Commissioners, and Mr. Vincent can maybe speak to this a little bit more, but I have seen planning commissioners in the past go ahead and just condition the project to make the connection. And I don't know if you want to do that or not, but that would resolve it. And I think, you know, as far as the rural look goes, on the property itself, there's not going to be curb, gutter, and sidewalk, I don't think.
No.
It's all just out in the public right-of-way, and so you will maintain the rural look on site. you have to have access, and paving makes the most sense. But as far as the other thing is, then eventually the sidewalk infill project will get to those and make those connections. So you have a couple choices: wait, or you could.
Is there the opportunity to have a meandering sidewalk within the 11-foot zone, or are we stuck with a straight 4-foot parkway?
I think we'll have to look at that. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Generally, we don't want that, but it has happened. So I think transportation could probably speak to that better than I could, whether.
And your
that would be
suggestion
permitted.
is to the connection at the ends. I was thinking that the sidewalk at the ends could at least widen out and connect to the curb so there's a way to get onto the sidewalk. Otherwise, it's an absolute dead end surrounded by landscape. Your suggestion was that we actually continue onto the adjacent properties and do more.
I have seen it happen in the past. That doesn't mean you have to do it, but I've seen the Planning Commission condition projects to complete across adjacent neighbors' properties just to make the connection, to fill it in, to make it.
I mean, it's
be
really
done.
not the adjacent neighbor's property if it's the street right-of-way, correct?
I don't have a clear vision of exactly where you're talking about.
East and west of the project.
In the right-of-way. Can you speak?
It's in the right-of-way.
Chair Bartlett, I believe immediately to the west there is one property that there is right-of-way frontage that would complete that section. I believe it's about 120 feet to La Jolla Drive, and then maybe 20 or 30 feet to the east across from Via Sevilla.
But that's all within public right-of-way. It's
Correct.
not on private land.
Correct.
Then. Right, okay. All right, well, those would, yes, please come forward.
Mr. Chair, if I could just address your issue, if I understand it correctly, you're thinking the meander, if it touches the curb, would give an opportunity for people to get on the sidewalk or the street. Well, it's not up there, but if you can picture the parcel map, we have actually 3 driveway entrances along Medcliff. So the distance is really minimal from the far west end of the project site, if you can picture the sidewalk there, to the first driveway. That's one opportunity for people to come off the street, get on the sidewalk. And then just another 40 or 50 feet further to the east, there we go, is the driveway entrance. That's another opportunity for them to come off the street, get on the sidewalk. And then further to the east again, about another 40 feet, is another opportunity. And then to the end of the project on the east side. So we're happy to meander the sidewalk. I personally hate meandering sidewalks. But we're happy to do that if the city, Public Works, would accept it. So I will tell you that we will work with the city staff to try to make that work if we can. Otherwise, I think you have opportunities for people to come off the street and get on the sidewalk without having to cross the landscape area.
Okay. And I believe there are driveways, the 2 properties to the east and west, their driveways are reasonably close to your property line.
Correct.
The other solution might be to at least extend the sidewalk far enough to hit their driveway, so that could be a good access point as well.
Yeah, I don't know what those distances are.
Well, they look pretty short, at least on the aerial photograph that you provided. But anyway, I'll bring it back to my fellow commissioners and see what we can put together for a motion. I can hear the gears turning. Miss Lodge.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll give it a go.
Thank you for going first. I appreciate it.
I would move to grant the modifications, the public street frontage waiver, approve a tentative subdivision map, coastal development permit, and a performance standard permit to allow the additional dwelling unit on parcel B, and to I don't know that we can condition this. Oh, and to approve the revised findings for this project. And ask that the applicant work with staff to create as natural a sidewalk in front of these properties as possible. I don't know that we can. I don't want to say that, you know, it absolutely has to be this way or that. And I understand, too, from the city's point of view, if it's not a concrete sidewalk, the maintenance issues are really big. And also, you know, to make it, I don't know that there needs to be uniformity. I think I like the idea of a meandering sidewalk, even though the applicant isn't happy with that. But I think given the comments that all of you have made, I think that perhaps the applicant could come up with something that is somewhere in between a plain old ordinary straight sidewalk and what we've been talking about here.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second to that motion so that we can have some discussion or not?
Mr. Chair, might we include in Commissioner Lodge's motion that the applicant work both with the Single Family Design Board and the city on an effort to incorporate as natural materials and look as possible, or is that just to be an assumption in working with the city?
Well, I think we could do it if we second the motion and then act on that, but I think until we second the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so put forward, you would like to have, if you could repeat that again then, working with the Single Family Design Board to...
Yes, I think it's just adding a phrase onto Commissioner Lodge's sentence with referencing the applicant working with the city. I'd like it specified, working with the Single Family Design Board and the city to accomplish, and then we can fill in the blank there or go back to Commissioner Lodge's language.
Mr. Chair, does this go back to the Single Family Design Board? It does? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that,
is that
yes, that
acceptable?
would be fine. Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Jacobs.
I would ask the motion maker and the seconder if there is interest in conditioning the sidewalk to make the connection to the sidewalk to the west, so that we do get a continuous sidewalk for this couple hundred feet. And this was based on the suggestion from the city's engineer. So if that's of interest to people, I would ask that to be included.
But not on the east?
Yeah, that's a part where it's just a tiny bit. It's hard to tell from the drawings that we have exactly how many feet would be involved. Maybe transportation can give us some better description.
Chair Bartlett, Commissioner Jacobs, excuse me. I don't have the exact number, but to the east is significantly less than it is to the west. I'm guessing it's about 20 or 30 feet to the east. To the west, it would be the entire frontage of the neighboring property, which I believe is around 100 feet.
All right. Well, under discussion, I would ask my colleagues to consider the short distance to the west. No, the short distance to the east and the longer distance to the west. Did I get that right?
To the east is the shorter distance.
Okay, the shorter distance to the east and potentially the longer distance to the west. We are, in order to create this subdivision, making a number of modifications and a waiver, and I would think it would be appropriate to improve the street frontage as best we can.
Okay, Mr. Chair,
Before we comment, I think we should hear what Mr. Vincent has to say.
Mr.
Vincent,
nip this one in the bud before it even gets out there.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I was just kind of waiting to see where this was going.
It's meandering.
Maybe. I'd like to comment on both conditions. First, the condition regarding the material of the sidewalk. I really think that it's necessary to have that condition acknowledge first and foremost that any material that is used must comply with the ADA. I'm sorry, but if the SFDB wants a material that doesn't comply with the ADA, that's not going to get constructed in the right-of-way. We just can't do that. If an alternative material is out there that works, then let's hear from that. The other element I would recommend including in that is giving the Public Works Department, the people who are going to be responsible for maintaining this sidewalk once it's constructed, the opportunity to say yes or no to that ultimate material as well. Again, we just can't go piecemealing through the city with a dozen different materials. This is why we spent all that time on the streetlight study to come up with a consistent streetlight form so that Public Works doesn't have to keep on maintaining 10 different types of streetlight hoods. I think they still have 10, but at least they're not getting 12. So those are my comments regarding the material. Regarding the off-site improvements, I'm not going to tackle the applicant if they offer that, but at the same time, this applicant is meeting the design standards. I understand that there are modifications associated with this project. The applicant could come in with a design that meets the standards as to the zoning with the frontage. It's available. You'd end up with 4 oddly shaped flag lots that would meet the zoning requirement of having 60 feet of frontage, but would not nearly work as well as the proposed subdivision. So in the sense of what is the impact and what is the condition addressing? The project is being currently conditioned to improve the public pedestrian right-of-way per the city standards. It will fill in at least one missing gap of our system, and the way that we have approached this in the past is that when that adjacent parcel comes in to develop, but primarily with a subdivision, that gap gets filled. I can't answer the question that Mr. Foley couldn't answer, which was why did the adjacent parcel only have half a sidewalk? I couldn't answer that. Anyway, so if the applicant is willing to take on that challenge, great. As long as it's in the right-of-way, I do not want to condition this project to have to somehow get into a catch-22 with a reluctant neighbor. But if it's a right-of-way, okay. And if the applicant's willing to do it, then I'm not going to object to that.
Great. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you. I wanted to make it clear that I was going by what Mr. Foley said in terms of the material for the sidewalk, that it would have to be concrete, but I was hoping that we could get some little variation in its design so it isn't just a straight sidewalk as is usually prepared. So that wasn't, my intent was not to go away from the concrete in terms of the material.
And I'd like to hear others weigh in on Commissioner Jacobs' suggestion as to the extensions on each end to have full connection.
Each or either.
Right. Ms. Larson.
I think it'd be great if they'd do it.
Words?
Mr. Chair, I think it would be preferable, but I hear Mr. Vincent's, cautionary advice to us, and so I would support it lightly in terms of it being an option for the applicant and a preference by the commission. But I think that's as far as we can go, is my sense, Mr. Vincent.
That's a good summary of my statement.
Okay. Well, I feel like the east connection is the most important. It's sort of the upstream. It's where people get forced out into the street. And it's a short connection. I would at least like to see that part incorporated, and at least gets people headed toward the park past your property before there's other problems. And I think the other long stretch is perhaps a bit much to put onto this applicant. Yeah. So, anyway, does the maker of the motion want to add anything else, or you want to keep it as you have it?
No, I agree with you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to add as a condition that the sidewalk be put in the short distance to the east of this project.
Is that okay with the seconder of the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Any further discussion? Ms. Jacobs?
I'm glad that Commissioner Lodge clarified her motion regarding materials, and I just hope that our language is clear enough on that we're not asking the Single Family Design Review Board or staff or Public Works to digress from the city standard in terms of materials, but that perhaps in landscaping or layout the Single Family Design Board could come up with something more creative, but that we definitely are sticking with the city standard for materials. Yes.
Yes. Briefly.
Because I would like to address the extension of the sidewalk. So, and I'm sorry, I didn't understand exactly where the motion stands with regard to that.
I think the motion added extending the sidewalk to the east, which we believe is a 20 to 30-foot stretch in front of the adjacent parcel to connect to the end of the existing public sidewalk.
Okay. And I just wanted to state on behalf of the applicant that would be acceptable, provided it is this short distance, if it's 22 and a half feet, that'd be okay. But also provided it is within the public right-of-way. I don't know that it is, but we have to assume that that would be the case. Otherwise, we have no
I think we
ability to do
could
it.
certainly add that to the motion just to make it clear.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Extended in the public right-of-way to the east of this project.
With that clarification, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. You have a project that is appealable within 10 days. So that was our last official item other than our administrative agenda. So I will move to the committee and liaison reports. Ms. Larson, is there anything to update us on with the staff hearing officer?
Oh, yes, there is. It's a little tricky because with our canceled meeting schedule, I get backed up. So occasionally we get caught because I can't always make the report. However, I believe I owe you 6:30, June 30th, and July 28th. And so everything was actually, the good part is that everything that was continued got worked out. So we didn't have to have any appeals. And so nothing is percolated up to the level of our attention. So that's all good. There was one at 2717 El Prado Road, which came in with a request for a 1,318 square foot accessory, and it did behave at 496 by the time the staff hearing officer had heard the applicant. So that's what's going on. It's good in Showland. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any committee or liaison reports? I see Ms. Lodge has her light on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have reports on both the Airport Commission and the Water Commission, and some pictures for you all, which have been provided to me by airport staff. They keep their website well updated with pictures as the project goes along. So if you want to follow what's happening out there, you can go to the airport website. Okay, in this shot you can see the new terminal and the little old terminal next to it on the right. And on the fence you can see a lot of blue. That is the mural that was painted. Thank you. And there is something of a close-up coming up. that was painted by a group of at-risk youth, of course, under the direction of the artist who was in charge of the project. And it was a bit of a challenge, but I think it's very, very successful. There are a series of like postcards of scenes in Santa Barbara, like the Dolphin Fountain, the Mission, and so on. Okay, the next slide. You can see the mural a little better, a little closer view of the entry side of the terminal itself. Next slide. There's the mural. And next slide. And this is from the other side, from the tarmac side. The new. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's the new terminal entrance. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now that's from the tarmac side, plane side. So the airport director, Karen Ramsdell, described the project as going on gangbusters, and they're very pleased with the progress that's being made on it. And we had an announcement from Mr. Cato that he would be arranging a tour, right, for the Planning Commission. I understand the City Council is touring the end of this month.
Oh, I don't know about the City Council, but yes, I talked to the airport staff and they said they'd be happy to arrange a site visit for the Commission of not just the terminal, but the new rental car service area that was a LEED Gold building.
Okay. Thank you. A couple of other items about the airport. Passenger count is up 6% over this time last year. Now, of course, that had been in a big decline from the previous year, but it's going in the right direction, largely because of the new service by Frontier. And then Ed Easton, Councilmember Ed Easton of the Goleta City Council is their liaison, and he expressed great appreciation for the fact that the Santa Barbara City Council did decline to proceed with the prospect of putting a target on airport property, which would give them none of the revenues and all of the traffic. So he was happy with that. Then on the Water Commission, the last meeting was at the wastewater plant at El Estero, and so there was a tour for the Water Commission. Before I get to that, though, one of the things that, particularly having lived through the drought in great detail, that went from 1987 to 1985 to 1993, and knowing what happened and how people were just wonderful. They really cut back on water use, and they like competed with themselves to see how little water they could get by on. And water use had been over 16,000 acre-feet a year at the start of the drought. It dropped to down around 13,000. It's still around 13,000. And population has increased, and it's because of all the conservation measures that were taken, people replacing toilets, older toilets that used a lot more water per flush, and other conservation methods and measures. This is great, but of course it means with the next drought it's going to be harder to do more conserving because we already are doing so much. But it's great that water use has been kept down at that level. Okay, on the first slide for the Water Commission, the Water Commissioners were well, and this all relates to the general plan, and we've heard some about the need to make some changes to the tertiary treatment plant because there's too much turbidity and too much salt in the water that's coming out of it, and that means that they have to use potable water to dilute it to make it usable on plants and so on, and to meet the standards for clarity of the water. And in looking at what might best be done, they've decided that it probably would be best to work on the secondary treatment part of it and make that more effective and more efficient so the water going into the tertiary treatment plant is of higher quality, lower turbidity. The turbidity relates to, if it's not as clear, it means there are little particulate things in there that might carry things that you don't want being spread out on landscaping. Okay, this is down a level, a damp, dark basement level, and that device in the middle of it has lines across it. It's really like a large drill bit, and it carries up any solids coming in with the influence, the wastewater that comes in. And I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to tour our wastewater treatment plant. I go way back to the one we had before this, which was only a primary, and it was really bad. It's a pretty smelly place, but the water that comes in is mostly water. Obviously, it's got stuff mixed in it that makes it not smell so good. But there are also solid things that get in there. Whatever can get flushed down the toilet or go down with the wash water from your laundry ends up in here. And it includes things like little rubber duckies and driver's licenses. Don't leave your driver's license in your pants pocket when you throw it in the laundry. That's how it gets down here. But of course, it adds to the problems of cleaning up the water. So this is where it comes in, and then next slide. This is the tank in which the microorganisms are being. All of the bubbling up is actually from aeration of air being injected into it to encourage the microorganisms that eat all the stuff that we want eaten in the wastewater. And next slide. It's the next tank, and then the next slide. You can see, I had a close-up, which I couldn't find when I was putting this together, but you can see that the water that's coming through there is almost completely clear. And actually, there's algae growing on there. And from here, it goes to the next part of the facility, which is the tertiary treatment facility. And even here, you can see there's sort of a foam on the surface of the water, which gets skimmed off. It needs to get skimmed off, and then they add whatever amount of water and potable water that's necessary. And this varies from day to day, what needs to be added, how much needs to be added to it. And then it's chlorinated before it's distributed. So the cleaner the water can be that gets to the tertiary treatment facility, then the less potable water has to be used, and that means more potable water available for the community. So I think that's... Let me see if there was anything else I wanted to... So it's a way of increasing our water supply. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Great. Well, those were very thorough, and I appreciate you, really getting into those reports and giving us the details, because obviously we all can't attend those. And
well, I enjoy knowing about what makes the city go. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much. With that, I think that's the end of our official business, so the Planning Commission is now adjourned.